All right, welcome everyone. Thank you again so much for joining for our AYA Talks event, Living, Loving, and Growing, AYA Social Connections Through Cancer. This series is brought to you by the Inova Adolescent and Young Adult Program in partnership with Inova Peterson Life with Cancer. We hope to periodically provide guidance and education on real life and real talk for AYA patients with cancer. I do have some housekeeping things before we get started. So, we will have about an hour and a half of content today. Please feel free to send any questions via the chat. We will not necessarily be able to address questions throughout the chat, but definitely at the end we're going to have a Q&A. So please feel free to send your questions. Please try to keep any questions general and refrain from sharing specific personal details, just so that we can be mindful of your privacy. This webinar will be recorded and it will be available on demand on the Peterson Life with Cancer YouTube page. There will be some great resources that we're going to highlight today throughout the presentation. Now that we took care of some of the housekeeping things, I can go ahead and introduce myself and all of our incredible speakers. So, my name is Vanessa Wagner. I am the Education Support Navigator with the Ash Childhood Cancer Foundation, and I primarily work in the PSV Center for Cancer and Blood Disorders at the Inova SHAR. My role involves supporting patients and families in providing education and career counseling, and I often do work with the AYA population. You might recognize me from one of our earlier AYA talks, Charting Your Course. During this talk, I talked a little bit about different post-secondary school options and scholarships that are available to our AYA population. If you weren't able to join that talk, I forgive you, but please make sure you watch that video on the Peterson Life with Cancer YouTube page. On that page, you'll also see another one of our AYA talks that we did called Navigating Cancer Costs, so definitely check that out. All right, I'm done talking about myself, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our two speakers here. So, one of our speakers for this session is Gemma Stratton. Gemma is a pediatric oncology behavioral health therapist with the Inova Peterson Life with Cancer program. She also works at the PSV clinic. Gemma's role is to provide therapeutic support to our patients and families. She has been involved in the Inova cancer community for 5 years, specializing in working with solid tumor and lymphoma patients. We will also be joined by Sarah Caldwell, an oncology nurse here at Inova, who is going to be facilitating our panel later during the session. Here are some of the things that we're going to cover throughout this presentation. So we're going to be discussing a little bit about the AYA journey and what that entails, some of the research found about the AYA population, common challenges and barriers, resources, and then we will have our awesome AYA panel that's here to talk with us today. And then we'll close with a Q&A at the end.
All right. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that introduction. So, as mentioned, my name is Gemma, and I am a therapist with the Life with Cancer program. I want to start with the session by just providing some context about the AYA population. We know our audience today may be patients themselves, caregivers or loved ones, or professionals or community members who are hoping to learn more about supporting others in their life. We're going to be using this acronym AYA a ton. You're going to hear it. You're going to hear it all over the place. That is currently what stands for adolescents and young adults who are diagnosed with cancer. So it's an acronym that we use to encompass the ranges, usually around 15 to 39 at diagnosis. That seems like a large range, I know, but the reason why we have a distinction for this population is there are a lot of unique considerations during this specific time of life. Um, you know, AYA patients don't always get a ton of visibility in cancer centers, in research and things like that, but it is estimated that over 85,000 AYA patients will be diagnosed this year alone. And of course, that doesn't include our AYA patients that have been diagnosed in years past, that are continuing on their treatment or recovery journey. And so while it is becoming more and more common for treatment centers to have dedicated AYA programs, that hasn't always been the case. And in many areas, those services are still very limited. But it is important to kind of think about the AYA journey because it is unique. And it is a time where there's a lot of identity formation, growing independence, major transitions. In the context of a cancer diagnosis, while there might be overlap here and there with other age ranges, certainly some of these concerns and some of these experiences aren't limited to the 15 to 39 age range at diagnosis. Um, it is clear that AOAs face a very unique path during and after their treatment. So this can include disrupted milestones, whether that be high school, college, post-secondary school plans, entering the workforce. It can be other kind of social milestones, like even things like going to prom, your 21st birthday, getting your first job, moving into your first apartment, going on your first date. There's a lot of things that are happening in this age range as an individual is transitioning from adolescence to adulthood and building their own life, and kind of making their own identity and their own place in the world. A lot of times AYAs experience diagnostic delays and care site confusion. Sometimes AYA patients have to face how to figure out where they're supposed to go and what protocols apply to them. If I'm 20 years old, should I be treated by adults or pediatrics? Certain diagnoses often have common age ranges that they're associated with, and sometimes AYAs might first appear like they're too young or too old for a certain diagnosis, leading in either maybe delays in getting that care because it's not assumed that they have that diagnosis, or some delays because oncologists and medical teams are trying to figure out where should they be treated. As mentioned, there's a lack of specific AYA programming, not only just programs at an institution, but also support groups and having spaces tailored to AYA patients. That's not always accessible and hasn't always been accessible. AYAs can be very underrepresented in research. We are also finding that there's certain diagnoses that younger and younger patients are being diagnosed with. And so the research has to catch up to that. We're seeing it in practice, but maybe don't have a full understanding of the best ways to move forward with treatment. There's, of course, all cancer diagnoses come with financial hardship, but there's some unique financial barriers that AYA patients face, and that's actually something we addressed in our last AYA talk, Navigating Cancer Costs. AYA patients are sometimes early in their career, have limited assets or savings, and that can create a really challenging financial landscape when there might not be as much of a safety net or as much of a um, access to other financial means. And right in the beginning, getting hit with a cancer diagnosis. There are a lot of unmet social needs, limited time and space to develop connections that can impact dating and marriage. Treatment can also impact the body through side effects or late effects that last into the survivorship and recovery period, which can include fertility. It can create changes to your body image and a patient's experience with their own sexual health. Of course, today, with our topic being AYA social connections, we're really going to focus on how treatment affects an AYA patient's social trajectory, meeting those milestones, making those connections, and pursuing relationships. So first, there's often impacts to friendships, new and old. Maybe you lose touch with your friends when you enter treatment, or they don't seem to reach out as much. Maybe they don't seem to really get what you're going through, or don't even know what to say, maybe even saying something unintentionally that just doesn't sit right with you. AOA patients often share a desire to interact with other patients who do get it, looking for those AOA focused support groups where they can meet peers, which may or may not be available. And of course, there's this comparison game. I think this has increased tenfold with the creation of social media, seeing what others are doing, what maybe you feel like you are supposed to be doing, and how that's different from your current day to day. Family stuff changes. AOA patients are in this transition point, maybe trying to get out on their own, gain independence, learning to make their own choices. But then comes a cancer diagnosis, causing you to have to lean on your family in a way that maybe you didn't expect. That can create some tension between wanting to protect your independence and also knowing you need a little bit more support. A lot of AOA patients endorse feelings of guilt or discomfort about needing the support. It wasn't what they had planned. And often privacy kind of feels like it goes out the window during treatment. You want your family there, but do you really need them hearing everything that's going on or being there in the hospital room with you when your doctors come in? Um, that can be a really hard balance. And you might even have some nosy relatives and long distance family members that want to know the ins and outs of your diagnosis. And those can be really hard conversations to navigate. Romantic relationships, dating can be hard during treatment. For some patients, they may be navigating an existing relationship that was formed before the diagnosis and now have to adapt to a new disruptive normal. Other parent patients might have had to put just dating and romantic relationships aside during treatment because it was just too much to juggle. Cancer treatment can cause changes to the body that can be hard to get used to and may affect self-esteem. And then there's the common question of when do I tell someone I have or have had cancer? What does that conversation look like? Um, and of course, in terms of romantic relationships, sometimes those questions around sexual health can feel really overwhelming. How do I even ask my doctor about that? P.S. Our next and last AYA talk of the year is going to be about this specifically. We'll have more information about that at the end of this today's session. And then lastly, I wanted to just touch on also parenthood. Um, there are AYA patients who are experiencing parenthood. We have maybe they have were just entering into that stage of their life, maybe just recently had a child before they entered treatment, or they're starting family planning after treatment, or in the midst of we're in the midst of that journey. And so not only are there changes sometimes to fertility that can affect family planning due to the treatment you receive, but maybe now you have to juggle your children and partner while going through treatment or experiencing recovery. There's questions like, how do I stay present day to day? How do I talk to my kids about this? And what if I feel like I don't have the energy to play or spend time with them the way that they want to? So there's a lot of really unique considerations, specifically, especially with parenting young children during this time. So as you can see, there's a lot of valid ways that cancer treatment can affect the social world of an AY patient. So what does the research say? First, it's common that the majority of AYA patients receive the bulk of their emotional support from family members, especially primary caregivers like their parents. This is a big shift from what is usually developmentally typical for this age range. Usually, the stage of emerging adulthood and independence actually results in forming emotional connections outside of your family through friends and community members. But research shows that a cancer diagnosis does change that typical developmental shift out of necessity. In addition to most of the support coming from the family, research shows that AYA patients also report an increase in conflict within the family system. And that makes sense, right? You want privacy, you want independence, you need support. And those things don't always work smoothly together in practice. And lastly, AYA patients who do endorse strong perceived support from their social network do exhibit lower psychological distress through treatment and survivorship. I wanted to highlight this because note how it says perceived support. If you are watching this right now and you're a caregiver or a loved one, I think that's really important because we sometimes we do what we feel is supportive for the AYAs in our lives. You might not fully get it, and unless you've experienced a cancer diagnosis at around this age range, you probably won't get it. But what's really important in evidenced research is that's all about what the AYA themselves identifies that they need and how they perceive that support. So that's why it's so important to let the AYA patient in your life guide you. Let them know, let them share with you how they need to be supported, even if it doesn't feel like how you would want to maybe support them. And so what? Why is all of this important to know? And why did we want to spend some time talking about this before we got into our panel? So knowing all of this is important because social well-being is just as vital as the treatment itself. There's a lot of evidence showing how important finding ways to talk about your social experience, whether that be at diagnosis, during treatment, or after treatment, can be beneficial to your long-term recovery. It reduces the sense of isolation that can cause that lack of withdrawal or that withdrawal and lack of motivation during care. It can improve overall quality of life during and after cancer treatment. Having some opportunities for social connection provides normalcy during a very abnormal experience. It promotes adaptive coping skills. So that's being able to adjust and cope with the ups and downs that come with treatment. Um, AYA patients that have access to supportive social networks have reduced rates of depression and anxiety. And lastly, for partners, whether that be a romantic relationship, a significant other, a spouse, it's an opportunity to build that stronger relationship. It's hard work, but there's also great resilience in that process too, and that some AYAs really speak to that experience. So as we prepare to transition to the panel, I'm going to highlight just the specific challenges that come up when we think about socialization, and then get into some resources that are out in the community. So of course, like we talked about, there's limited social interaction, infection risk, appointments get in the way, but so do the late effects that can develop after treatment. Just because treatment's ended doesn't mean that the way that our body has been affected goes away too. Not every setting has the most inclusive visitor policies. Who is considered family? What type of involvement can a girlfriend or boyfriend have versus a spouse? Concepts of who is my family? Maybe that is my best friend. Maybe I have certain identified people I want to be present with me. There's a general altered sense of self during this process. Everything you might have relied on and understood about your identity kind of gets turned upside down in some ways. And so there's really common questions during this period of who am I and where do I fit in? And of course, you might be in a treatment setting where you don't see patients that look like you. They might all seem too young, seem too old. And again, it kind of feeds into like this lack of visibility, like are my needs being seen and heard? And that's really what we want to target today during the panel. It is so important to see and learn from patients who have walked the same path as you. So before we get there, just go a quick handoff of some resources specifically around social connection. There are a lot of really great programs. This could be a whole presentation itself if I just focused on resources, but I wanted to highlight some of the ones we find get the most feedback on. So one of them is Elephants and Tea. They provide programming and meetups and virtual happy hours and many different things that are specific for the AYA patients, but they also have a very one-of-a-kind magazine that is fully written by AYA patients and survivors. So that is online as well as a print copy and can be a really great way to not only read stories from other AYA patients, but also if there's ever been an interest in sharing your story, any submission that they receive gets accepted. And then there's Cactus Cancer Society. They have a lot of wellness programs of all kinds. They really have specialized in groups for expressive arts, creative writing, art, book clubs, things like that. So another way to connect with AYA patients and survivors that through an activity or a shared interest. There's Cancer Buddy, which is an app that it provides free peer support. So there are forums of other patients and families based on diagnosis, age, treatment center. It is professionally moderated to make sure that it stays like a supportive and safe space, but is a great way to just start connecting with others, finding resources, things like that. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight also Stupid Cancer. They host all kinds of events throughout the year, including virtual events. They're known for their annual Cancer Con that happens actually in Washington, D.C. every fall. And so they're another great resource. When you go to their website, they also have so many pages and pages of things for AYA patients to read and learn about, so they can really find that community. Something that sometimes gets lost in the AYA conversation is that concept of parenting. And so I wanted to highlight the Bright Spot Network. They're a really unique organization that focuses on young cancer patients and survivors who are parenting young children. They have support groups of all types, and I particularly really love their Bright Reads and Bright Box programs, which allows patients to have books and activities sent to their home in order to facilitate positive family activity and interaction with one another, with the fact that a parent might be going through treatment in mind. So it's for young kids, things that might be an easy activity that a parent who is not feeling very well could do with their child with very little prep. As well as many other resources. But I think it's important to know, when going through that kind of unique stage of parenthood, to know of a cancer specific community you can turn to. And of course, Inova Peterson Life with Cancer has many offerings for the AYA population. These are just two of our AYA support groups that we run, but there are also fitness classes, wellness classes, and other offerings you can explore using the same calendar you use to register for this session. So I really invite patients and community members. Most of those offerings are available nationally unless otherwise stated. So it's another way to just start meeting other people and receiving some support, even if you're um, AYA or your institution didn't have anything AYA specific. All right. Without much further ado, I'm going to finish my spiel, impart some of that knowledge to you, but most excited to transition over to Sarah. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, who will be moderating our AYA panel.
Thank you, Jama. My name is Sarah Caldwell. I am an oncology nurse at Inova Fairfax. I work with the adult population with people who are inpatient, so they're staying at the hospital during their cancer treatment. We have always a little portion or sometimes a lot of a portion of AYA cancer patients, cancer survivors on our unit. Uh, it's my pleasure to host this section where we're going to have a panel discussion with patients and survivors ranging from fairly newly diagnosed all the way through long-term survivors. We were talking about how we need a term for that because if we're diagnosed during that AYA, we kind of always have that tag of being an AYA cancer survivor. We're going to go through a number of topics. We're going to look at family relationships, relationships with parents, with siblings, extended family. We'll talk about parenthood, about significant others, and then we'll also talk about family member or friends who are part of our social circle and new friends that we may find on the cancer journey, as well as just interacting with the general public. I'd like to ask, we are going to do questions afterwards. If you have a question, please drop it in the chat, but we might not get to it in real time. We'll get to it after the discussion. And we'll start with some introductions. Evan, can I pick on you first?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Evan Cantwell. I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer back in, the 1900s, last century, in 1999. So it's been 26 years. About 7 years ago, I was also diagnosed with squamous cell carcinoma on my nose. So one was very easy to hide when I was much younger, and the other was literally right smack in the middle of my face, which I couldn't hide when I was at work. But it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Laura, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Laura. I'm a Hodgkin's lymphoma survivor for 11 years now. I was diagnosed at age 34 and underwent chemotherapy for 6 months every other week. And I had two small children when I was diagnosed, age 4 and 1.
Thank you. James?
Hello, I'm James. 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with osteosarcoma. Was when I was 16. I went through, about 9 months of chemotherapy and a surgery for that. And then it came back a few years later and I did some immunotherapy to follow up. But yeah.
Thank you. And Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily. I was also diagnosed with osteosarcoma, but back in 2018. So I've been about almost 7 years cancer free, but I also did about 9, 10 months of chemotherapy, and then I had a total knee replacement, and half of my leg is metal now. So yeah.
Thank you. So the social impact of cancer reaches across all relationships. For many adolescent young adult cancer survivors, it feels like a BC and an AD. There's a before cancer and an after diagnosis. And the relationships that we share after diagnosis can be significantly different. There can be a significant change. I'd like to start with talking about our parents. I feel like probably everyone has a story of their parent being mistaken for the cancer patient at some point instead of them. But I'd love to hear from anyone who'd like to talk about how cancer affected their relationship with their parent.
So I think I have especially weird case of this as before I was diagnosed, when I was about 10, my mom was diagnosed with low-grade ovarian cancer. And so we've had a lot of experience with this type of stuff, but some ways good, some ways bad. But if anything, my diagnosis and going through my treatment really made me realize, what my mom has gone through. And if anything, it made us, in some weird way, be closer together. Additionally, I was spending 9 months in the hospital with my mom and my dad, or when I'm not in the hospital, lying on the couch because I didn't have enough energy to storm up to my room and lock the door. And so, you know, we like to joke, say, diagnosis, of course, it's horrible, but in a lot of ways, it really did give us a year to bond and, be with each other that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Great. Did she go with you to treatment at all, or?
Yeah, yeah. My treatments, I would have a couple nights in the hospital at a time. And so a lot of times I, my mom and my dad, the hospital was willing to let one of them, stay there overnight to pediatrics. And so most of the time I had, either most of the time was my mom. When my mom couldn't make it, my dad staying with me, which was nice.
I'm glad you had that support.
Hmm. So I was 23 years old when I was diagnosed, and I, basically just graduated from undergrad. So I'm moving back into my parents' house upon diagnosis. I get fired from my job, which is just like a part-time job, but I'm working at a university. But they're like, "Oh, you should, take care of your health." Um, but my parents are doubling down on it. This is the first, we've really dealt with something like that in our family, like immediate. My that I was aware of. And that's very important. So in that my dad was a cancer survivor before, but so just the way I was raised, I mean, we're coming from a Japanese American community where you don't talk about health as much. Things are always, you talk about your achievements, you talk about, what you're going to do, your tasks. Um, Not that my dad's Japanese, but very rarely do we talk about health in our family. So this is the 80s, 90s. It wasn't until about 15 years later when we're on a trip to join some other cancer advocates out in Tennessee, where we're driving together on a road trip, did we really first like have a discussion and talk, like really talk about things, not just the superficial, like I hope you get better, those kinds of things. He was always supportive, don't get me wrong. He's the one picking the hospitals. My mom, I was very fortunate. Family was all in and being caregivers and taking care. But with that, I would say because I was so young, I had a protective like veil, if you will, meaning I'm trying to protect my mom from what I'm really going through. So I'm trying not to tell her like how bad it is, or yeah, I'm trying to like sugarcoat it.
Great.
Just so I'm like worried about her, which is like such a strange thing when you think about it. But when you look at it in totality, it's it's just letting yourself be available for help and caregivers, and obviously learning how to be vulnerable and basically just surrendering um, to those that want to help you. But as you said earlier, Gemma, articulating what we need as patients, that's an ongoing process for me, even now as grown up adult, 50 years old. So that's if there's a workshop on that articulation, communicate. I know that's what we're here for, but um, there's a worksheet for like colorectal cancer diagnosis where they just like go down the check. But how do you talk to your family about getting a colonoscopy? Those kinds of things. I know it's from my background, that's helpful. Just I know it sounds ridiculous if you majored in English or something, or you're very close to people, but yeah, I'll stop there.
I think that managing other people's expectations and emotions while you're going through treatment is another level. that you have to carry as a cancer survivor. Yeah.
I kind of had a different relationship with my parents when I was going through treatment. So I was 20 years old when I got diagnosed. So I was in my sophomore year in college. I hadn't lived at home in 2 years. So moving back home in the middle of my sophomore year was not something I wanted to do, but I had to. And then you add that into like suddenly I'm the sick kid in the family. I have two siblings that are younger than me that were still at home. So it's like I'm suddenly the sick kid, which led to my parents kind of like hovering way more than I was used to in the 2 years since I had moved out. So that led to a lot of arguments with my parents, boundary arguments where I was like, can you please leave me alone? But they were worried about me because I was sick and I needed help and all that kind of thing. So looking at it years later with a different perspective, I know they were just trying to be there for me. At the time, I didn't appreciate it because I was annoyed and wanted to kind of do it by myself or do it the way I wanted to. And I didn't like how they always like looking back now, I'm very grateful that my parents always wanted to spend the night with me in the hospital and that kind of thing. But when I was going through that, I did not want them to stay with me all the time. I actually like would throw like fits. And I was 20 years old throwing a fit, but I was because I felt like that was the only way I could get my point across. And but looking back, I am grateful they were there. But I would emphasize like a boundary talk with your parents is always a good idea. And even though they have good intentions, sometimes their good intentions might not be what you need at the moment. And that's something that I still, not still, but at the time I had to work on with my parents a lot.
That's a great idea to have a boundary talk about what you want them involved with and places that you might need some of that independence that you feel like you're losing with the diagnosis and going through treatment. Laura, were your parents around when you were diagnosed?
Yeah, we had just moved to this area, so we were several hours away from like where we had mostly grown up our whole lives, my husband and I. So, we were just adjusting to the area and then, got diagnosed, which was a process in and of itself, and a lot of stress with trying to figure out what was actually going on. So then we did have to ask, we had our family, our young family. I was, had just had a baby and received my diagnosis, and it was, I couldn't take care of, my kids all the time. I had appointments and procedures and things like that. So we did have to have them come help, and they were very gracious and available. My mom took leave off from like work, family medical leave, and was able to come to help, take care of the kids when I was going through treatment. So we had our parents really did come and help, but we had to ask other people for help too.
Mm. There can be that sweet relationship kind of in the intensity of the moment that your parents got to be part with the kids too. So there's something different about that for their early childhood. Yeah. Emily, I know you said you had siblings. How did you relate to your siblings during treatment?
So right when I had gotten diagnosed, so I got diagnosed at the end of 20, like the middle of the school year in 2018. So that fall, my brother was going to college. So he was kind of away for a lot of when I was really sick. But my sister was home. So me and my sister got very close, but there was always this kind of, I don't want to say, I don't really know the word for it, but I felt like I didn't want to ruin my sister's senior year of high school. So I would always, and not that I would have, but I would always be like, oh, like mom, dad, you should do this with Abby. You should do that. Because I was trying to kind of not take the attention away from her. And I'm the oldest sibling, so I think that's also just kind of in my nature to be like that. But I was very much an advocate for my parents and other family members and everyone just kind of doing other things with my siblings and not like just focusing on me because I know they're kind of going through their own stuff too and dealing with their sister who's sick. So that's a whole other conversation. But yeah.
So you were trying to kind of keep things normal for your siblings on some level?
Yeah. I mean, there would be times where I would have conversations with my sister. Like, my sister was there when my hair first started to come out. My sister was there the first time my blood counts plummeted and I fell over because I passed out. So my sister has seen a lot of it, but she dealt with that and she went to therapy and did all that and was able to work through that, which I'm thankful for because I hate it that she had to like see that.
Yeah, that had to be hard for her. You said your brother was out of town. So how
Yeah.
did that affect things for you? Was he still able to be part of your journey, or did it kind of just put pause for a little while?
Um, my brother has always dealt with things very distantly. He's not a heavy emotional guy, if that makes sense. But you always can tell that you know that he cares. So he was away at school, and his school was 4 hours away. So it's not like he could come home easily. But
Hmm.
he came home for all the like big events, like when I rang the bell, when I had surgery, when I did all that. He would try to be a part of everything like that.
That was great that he was able to come back. Yeah.
And if I can, I have a younger sister and an older brother. And my older brother was also in college when I was going through treatment. I kind of had, you know, there would be sometimes he would come, he was, slightly further away. So he was really only coming back when he had extended breaks. And there were
Mhm.
times like he would come back and he'd be told, mom or dad are going to be in the hospital this weekend with James. And he'd be like, whoa, I did not even realize any of that stuff was happening. And, of course, he knew I was going through treatment, but he had no idea what it looked like and what I was going through. I think on some level that, definitely hurt me to be like, oh, my brother doesn't really know what's going on. Um, and so, to contrast that, I did have my younger sister who was, I think I felt a lot the same way that Emily did, where, I knew she was a freshman in high school and I wanted her to be able to do all the things that she needed a parent to drive her back and forth. I didn't want to be the person who, mom and dad need to be taking care of James, so she can't do that. She was very involved in, the inverse was true, where she was trying to organize all of her things that mom and dad could be with me and help me out. And so
Mhm.
her being there and working it out definitely strengthened our relationship. But I think my brother being away, I don't think it, necessarily, I still love my brother. We're still, close, but it definitely didn't help that he wasn't as involved. And so,
Mhm. I always think it's difficult for like siblings and friends who have no concept of cancer because we're so young with the diagnosis to be in a world that they have no relationship to. They don't understand what a chemotherapy cycle is. They don't understand what neutropenic means. And we all kind of wish that we could be that way too.
Sarah, can I add on to that thought?
Please.
So I had a couple friends, when we all go to college, like we have like this little group of guys and like we're tight, we all went to high school together, but we're all at our separate colleges and, everyone's doing their own thing. What I realized looking back at is not that people don't care or just the relationships that I had, but it's just maybe they didn't have the language to know how to or even the understanding of how to share that they care. Even I'm just going to flip it reciprocal for me. Okay, so meaning my friends' dads died in the late 90s from cancer, so their only knowledge of cancer might be through death. I don't understand what that is when I'm at my college and I mean we show up for the funeral, we try to be supportive, but I didn't have the language at that time to, you know, from a caregiver perspective. So for me, I'm just like stumbling through naivete. And then I get diagnosed and I have an expectation, yeah, that they understand what's going on. And looking back, it's like, holy moly, like that was some radical things. Like my body's going, they're taking body parts, for me, for real. And it's like, how do they even know how to tell? Meanwhile, I'm trying to hide it. I'm being weird about it, or just for protective. Sorry, these all conditional words, but I'm trying to hide my ostomies from my friends, from my best friends. Okay, like I don't want them to know. Of course, they probably know, but they don't care because they love me. Um, but that whole time, I'm so sensitive about it. I'm just like insecure. I'm trying to figure out. That's me trying to figure it out. But neither one of us had the language to even really talk about it. And years later, we've talked about that from the sibling point of view. For me, I had two older brothers. We're only 3 years apart. They're both in the military, so they were kind of abroad, like physically abroad. And then they were able to come back for the major surgery. And I wasn't able to sit, so they had to like rescue me from New York City from Memorial Sloan Kettering and like come up with this Jenga pillow thing. We handled it through humor with one brother, and the other brother, who's a little bit more serious, he's a Marine. There's no humor there. So he's scolding the other brother because we're in the cancer ward, and my brother has this ridiculous laugh, and I can hear them both. And I'm just trying to get out of the hospital, but it's a whole just escapade because they're trying to, get me back to Virginia. But they certainly cared. They were just doing their own thing in that point of life, I think, from my perspective now.
The milestones definitely get interrupted with the cancer diagnosis, where siblings and friends are doing what's more of a normal trajectory. The cancer patients, I don't even know the right word for it. Maybe you guys can. It's not like you're sidelined, but your trajectory is just going to be different.
I feel like time kind of stops while everybody's moving forward.
It's a good way to put it. Yeah.
You're moving forward in a different way.
Mhm.
But I think kind of listening and looking back as I was like preparing for this is I think people like asking for help or it's hard or like knowing like how people can help you, but like I can be very task oriented, so I'm not like a big ideas person, but if you give me assignment, like I'm getting it done for you. And like listening to kind of everyone's experience, like maybe coming like people don't know what to say or they don't want to say something that upsets you or they say something that upsets you, but like maybe finding ways to like ask for help from like which is a lot to ask of like someone going through cancer, but like how can I give this person a task or an assignment or like even if it's something little like call me on Wednesday at 1 p.m. like assignments like can open doors to like conversation and like yeah like giving someone like a way that they can help you, even if it's something super little or minute. It can, I think, be valuable.
Yeah, the tasks that turn into those intersections where relationship can continue to build even in this different world you've been dropped into. Thank you all. I'd like to talk about significant others, spouses, if you guys are willing to pivot in that direction. Evan, I'm going to pick on you if you don't mind, because I know
Sure.
Charlotte was with you at the beginning.
Still is. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So we were college sweethearts, and we're 2 years out of school when I'm diagnosed. But basically, we're just to set the stage here of context. We're lying that she's my girlfriend because she's not going to get in the hospital room if she's not. So we just say she's family, and then she's allowed in the room. She's always there. She learned how to sleep in these chairs that are impossible to sleep in, but many, many countless nights learning how to do that always by my side. I saw some of your questions too, so I'm gonna jump around. So apologize if I'm jumping everywhere. Um, Really, she was like the torchbearer in the hospital, if you will, the protector. Um, you know, talking to all those mean nurses. I'm kidding, Sarah. But really, I mean, mainly from an ER perspective, not from a surgery perspective, because obviously you're going to be a priority for surgery if you're scheduled. But when you're in an emergency and you're going through the ER and there's a queue, or your blood pressure's dropping and you think you have sepsis, time is an issue, which happened a couple of times. But she was able to stress the urgency. Part of my issues is that I've looked healthy sometimes. I never lost my hair. So I'd show up presenting myself, and the speed at which I can get urosepsis is that's one of my superpowers. It's great. But that happened a couple times. But she was basically the one advocating for me always. And I would say, I mean, it's in the space now today. There seems to be more resources for, and you shared in the beginning for the caregiver. But even 10 years ago, when I first started doing advocacy, it seemed like there was a lot more. We're always in the forefront, the patients, the thrivers, the survivors. Um, and that's what's flipped, is, even if it's emotional health, mental health, it's trying to get that equity, if you will, of access, for caregiver and for patient, because they're going through stuff that I didn't even realize until her mother went through cancer. Because now I'm seeing it as like, oh wow, you're helpless. You can't, you're trying to help, but there's a lot of things you can't do. Um, and yeah, so if trying to find resources for that caregiver, I think is something that maybe could be improved now. I don't know, but yeah, or even the wanting of that person to seek them out. Because we're always like thrown in the forefront, the us as patients and survivors.
The caregivers do get fatigued too. I know as a nurse, I try to make it part of my practice to check on the family at some point during the shift. And I'll see patients, family members who are literally living using those wonderful couches that are really designed to be wiped off clean, not really designed to sleep on. They're just living there. I was like, go take a walk, go get some sunshine. Have you eaten today? So yeah, our caregivers are pretty amazing set. Can I ask you just to follow up on that? Since you guys have been together for so long, how has your interaction with your cancer diagnosis changed over these years?
Sure. So I am coming off of volunteering in the cancer advocacy. I've been doing that since about 2015, 16. Where I was like an ambassador. The power of sharing your story, first off, and being surrounded by others. That was kind of the first time through, nonprofits, finding those nonprofits where you can connect to other survivors, young survivors. I mean, you really can't put it into words. So that's what got me into that space, and then becoming a mentor. But here we are 20 years later. Okay, so much time has passed. Some people just want to move on, right? Like, even my mother-in-law is like telling me, there's only so much you can do. Like she's trying to be polite in a southern way of you need to stop talking about cancer. But I'm trying not to do it for me, but for others, and helping others go through it. But there was that residual kind of, let's leave this behind us and let's move on a little bit, I think. And I mean, this is me projecting and interpreting, but so that is a challenge, because everyone deals with it in their own pace. I think time is very important, meaning it's not linear in terms of the treatment for emotional and physical health. It's you might get sick later and you might need more of that network or care or
Mhm.
compassion, to connect. So yeah. But in the beginning, yeah, it was more treat. So she has and yeah, it totally depends on the caregiver's personality. She calms down when things are in like we're in like survival mode for real. Like decisions need to be made. things slow down for her, that executive functioning, whereas mine is like lighting up, like, like there's a dinosaur chasing me. So I'm like freaking out. So I think that balance helped us when we're in that stage of, you're a year out of diagnosis or something. But 20 years later, it's a whole different landscape, because you still have the residual, body keeps the score kind of thing if you never really dealt with it, or trauma, or those are words that I didn't even understand were words that applied to us, like, oh, that's just for war people have been, veterans who've been to war. But truly, yeah, getting triggered just by soap at a doctor's office, like literally getting nauseous just by the smell of the soap, like literally, like over a decade later. There's a lot of things that are still in there that you just don't know. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm just saying we're on different timelines, and yeah, it's trying to find that balance of and checking in and talking and figuring out where that balance is, and of course listening to this is when you're not in the ER, of course, like that. It, you're not in a survival mode when things have calmed down, and that's when those conversations certainly happen. Yeah. So I've tried to back off a little bit and focus on, hey, we're living, we're thriving, we're doing things. Let's go. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Laura, would you like to speak to that at all? To a
What was your,
relationship with, I'm so sorry, your
okay.
relationship with your spouse and just the impacts of your
Yeah, I'm trying to
communication, your
think.
roles.
Yeah. Trying to think of like what the best, I guess one thing that like first popped into my mind is like I remember like making a point to like still go out on like a date or to find somebody else to watch the kids again. But there were a few times that like we found time to do that, like getting dressed up, deciding what to do with the hair or lack of hair, like so I do remember like doing that and trying to like feel normal, and that was it's easy to just kind of like keep going and like we don't need to worry, let's just keep moving forward and getting through it and like trying to find the end point. But I think taking time to do things that like are normal with are things that like I remember. So I guess going to the pumpkin patch and like just still trying to do like fun things.
Did you have to tell yourself this feels normal while you were doing it?
I think the hardest part for me, like, and I guess I'm being vain, was just like, yeah, like the hair, like dealing with the hair and like the wig I got was really itchy, to be
Oh
honest. And like
no.
I could just never get that thing right. And so then I wore caps a lot. And I don't even know how I got into the hair from this, but I guess being normal and like going out, like knowing people are like looking at you. Um, because I wanted to be comfortable and the cap was more comfortable. So just I think like going out was hard in that respect because people probably were looking at me and maybe they weren't, but in my mind, I felt like to some degree a little bit of a spectacle with just looking different, thin, that type of thing. So, um, but the lady who gave me the wig was like, women, make sure you need hair. Like it's good to have hair once in a while as a woman. I remember her saying that and thinking, I think she's right because when I did wear, I think it was helpful just for feeling normal at times,
Mhm.
even though I hated that thing. Invest in a good wig.
Good advice. Good advice. Did anyone else have any body image issues that really impacted relationships? Did the kids notice? Did the kids care that your hair got lost?
Um, you're asking me, I guess.
Yes.
No, well, my 1-year-old, didn't know what was really going on. My 4-year-old probably like I think she was there when like my husband shaved my head. So I think we just kind of said this is what we have to do. Mom's sick, in terms she understood. I don't remember her like running away. She's not like a super reactionary child. So she kind of took it in stride and we just did it and said, this is what we have to do. And it didn't really bother her, I don't think. Yeah.
When you talked to her about your cancer, were there certain ways that you would talk to her about it?
I mean, we're always just very straightforward, in a like appropriate way for the age. So I don't remember, obviously I would choose my words carefully and try not to be, scare her, but she's insightful. So, I mean, she knew like I went to treatment, I came home, I slept for 3 days. She would put blankets on me, like that was her little job. So I think just once again, she had little things that she did that were part of the routine. Um, and kids adapt. I think it just became kind of normal for her. And we did fun things on my off weeks. So, go to just kids enjoy going to the park or playing outside. We did a lot of that. So,
Just try to balance it.
yeah, yeah. And grandparents were there. So that was, fun when during treatments and people came to stay with her. So, she kind of
Would
enjoyed those times.
would your family stay with you for extended periods, or would they just come for treatment days and then leave?
They would mostly come. I remember I had treatments on Wednesdays and then they would stay through so like Thursday or Friday, usually Friday, and then if the weekend, sometimes my husband works weekends. So usually I was okay by Saturday to like take care of the kids. But it did take a toll on me. Like I really couldn't, everybody's different, and I really couldn't I could not have taken care. I could barely do anything for like the 2 days after chemo. So yeah, I definitely, if I didn't have that, I asked for help from somebody I didn't know very well who I was in a Bible study with. And she said she had been a nanny. And I didn't know this woman at all. And I said, is there any way like you could come and help when, I don't have somebody to help? And she helped me so many times.
Wow, that's wonderful. I'm glad you're able to find help with that. I
Yeah,
do
that's
feel
okay.
like they need another word for cancer fatigue because fatigue is too light of a word. Everybody
Yeah.
thinks they know what it means, but
Yeah.
cancer fatigue is so deep and just kind of bone crushing, glues you to the couch.
Hmm.
So, have your children talked to you about cancer? Have you talked about cancer since it happened with the kids, or is it kind of just drifted to the background for your family?
Yeah. I mean, now and then we bring it up. And I'll ask them like what they remember. And I mean, my little one would, I mean, my youngest wouldn't really remember anything at that age. But my daughter just says, she remembers me going to treatments, me resting, me wearing like a cap. But I think it has made her. I mean, we certainly have talked about it because when I go to appointments, when I had to go to routine follow-ups,
Mhm.
sometimes she would come with me too, so I will say, like, I think it's made her more sensitive and insightful, like seeing other people go through things or like at school, if she finds out friends are sick, like, I think she has a different perspective than, having gone through that and can kind of reach out to them in a different way than maybe somebody else. So I think it's been like a blessing in how she can impact other people.
Yeah, for empathy.
Mhm.
It is beautiful. Thank you. I know we're getting short on time, but I would like to talk about friendships, and just how friendships changed or didn't change, maybe even. So, Emily and James, do you guys have anything you'd like to share with us? Any friendship changes?
Yeah, so mine's like not so happy to start off with. Um like a month or two into my treatment, I lost my best friend. Like she kind of grew distant, didn't want to like she was in, so I went to school in Richmond and I was living up in Northern Virginia. So it was hard for her to come up and visit me all the time and that kind of thing. And then it just like led to her essentially saying that my cancer was too much for her to deal with, which that was not fun to hear, especially as someone who is sick and going through all of that. But it was kind of a blessing in disguise that that happened because as soon as that happened, other people that I would have never expected to show up for me did. And like the amount of times that instead of people just like being like, oh, like what day can I come over? They would text me and be like, can I come over right now? Like, are you home? And then they would come and I would be like, hey, I'm not feeling well. And they'd be like, that's fine. We can just put a movie on and just like sit here. So the amount of people that did show up was really great. And then when I eventually went back to school the next year, um, the friendships that I ended up making were a lot more genuine than the one that I lost. So, yes, it sucked losing a friend going through that, especially during that time, but the friendships I made after that were even better.
Yeah. Were you
Yeah.
able to make friends with anyone else who was an adolescent, young adult cancer survivor at the time you were going through treatment?
Yes. When I was in Anova, there was another younger person who was only like 3 years younger than me. We became friends just because he was being treated adolescently at the same time well, not pediatrically at the same time I was. So we were friends. And then I actually found like an online community, if that makes sense. It wasn't like a support group or anything like that. It was ironically through Instagram. Like I had posted a picture of my diagnosis or like something and I had tagged osteosarcoma. And then I suddenly had other people. I had a girl in Florida, a boy in California, and then another boy in Ohio all kind of reach out. And then we became a little like friend group and we would text and FaceTime and keep up with each other and all of that. So I kind of found friendship in kind of like an unconventional way, but they were some of the best friendships because they knew exactly what I was going through. And a lot of them had the same kind of surgeries I did, which osteosarcoma is very rare to find other people that have that. And it makes it not as easy to find support because there's support for a lot of other cancers, but there's not really support for osteosarcoma. And so it was nice to find other people that could share those like feelings and thoughts with me. But yeah,
That is a unique way to find a community, but I'm really
yeah,
glad you were able to. Are you still in touch with people?
yeah, I am. Yeah.
And James, how did friendships change for you?
Yeah, so my treatment was like right when COVID was ending. And so, this was right after I went through, 2 years of all of my interactions with all my friends being online. And so we kind of already had that system of, oh, we're not meeting in person anyway. And so I kind of just, you know, tried my best to stay up with those friends as much as I could. And some of it was also, on the flip side, the hospital still had COVID protocols in place where my friends couldn't really come and see me that much. And when I was at home, I was not having the energy to do anything. Um, and so, I think near the end of my treatment, we were able to get one of my friends into the hospital, but other than that, most of the stuff was online. Um, and then the other thing is, because I had pretty much a year of high school where I wasn't in the school, I then walked into my senior year once I finished, and I kind of realized I don't really know anybody here, and it's my senior year, and that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I feel like I was able to try to, some of the people I knew through like middle school that I was trying to keep in touch with online, that was, trying to reconnect with them in person after treatment a little hard. But yeah, I would say during treatment, definitely, because I could go on my phone and be online. That takes a lot less energy than having to schlep myself over to someone's house or trying to have an active conversation with somebody on the couch, which I'm not up to in the middle of chemotherapy. Um, but yeah, so I'd say definitely trying to have that, online support where you can really take stuff at your own pace is nice. And then at the same time, just know getting back into the real world afterwards. It's not an easy process, but yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a re-entry period after diagnosis and treatment that, the doctors say you can go do stuff again. It's hard to figure out the new normal.
Yeah.
Mhm. And did you have an opportunity to meet other cancer survivors when you started treatment?
So not as much, because the hospital is still, in COVID protocols, so there wasn't as anything in person I could really do. All of the communal spaces were still closed. I did go to Inova's like support group monthly meetings, and those I think really were helpful. And so, it was more of a online connection where once a month I could talk to people. And I think, you know, even if I wasn't seeing those people in person, knowing that there were those other people that were going through the same thing I was or had gone through the same thing that I was going through really did help me. I guess I did do wish that I met more people that were, actively going through treatment at the same time, but that wasn't really an option at the time. And, I probably should have gone online, on social media to see other people, see some online communities there. That didn't cross my mind, but
Well, it seems like it was already a crazy time between COVID and then
yeah.
adding cancer diagnosis on top. So, Evan or Laura, would you guys like to speak about any friendship changes?
Sure. I'm still with my core group. I got married to my girlfriend, so that's good. That's a win.
Great.
Um, to this day, I would also condition this with, we were talking about barriers earlier. My friends still do not understand what it means to have ostomies, and I don't expect them to understand it ever, meaning what my physical limitations are. So if we're talking about communication with friends, um, it's really up to us to articulate. It's not going to be your doctor. It's not going to, just you to whoever is trying to get you to climb a mountain in the desert. Um, as many times as I tell them, I was like, I cannot go to a desert. I just can't. Like last time I went to a desert, I was septic. Basically, I get dehydrated very easy. But my point is like even 20 plus years later, they're very in shape. They're like they play soccer, they run marathons, they're that type. But my point, just for me as a patient survivor, it's my responsibility, I think, to draw those barriers. And then to Emily's point earlier, or actually James raised it earlier too. If there is a segue to this, like part two, I'm curious about online, physical, and then like where those worlds, the digital realm meets. Here we are digitally, and then meaning in terms of relationships, if there's any evidence-based stuff in terms of support or, um, what that means, because it really is a new connection, not new, but over the last 15 plus years. It wasn't until I saw YouTube, meaning I tried to hide my ostomies for the first decade, and it was just exhausting, just out of insecurity. And of course, they saved my life. But when I saw, we're talking about AYA, when I saw, excuse me, a 13-year-old sharing on YouTube, like changing her ostomy, and I'm like, what is going on? But in my brain, it actually helped me like progress, like past that barrier, and helped me like understand how to take care physically of my appliances better, which led to better health outcomes. So in that physical sense, it really did help. So there's all these little digital connections that are happening infinitely that I think are helping a lot of us. But then on the other flip side of that is, was I ready to share publicly? Because for the algorithm to find me, I have to share that I have an ostomy, right? So on Instagram, which I'm fine now, excuse me, doing that. But back then, I probably still wasn't, ready to do that. But that's how those communities will connect if we're talking, Facebook, Meta, like them finding each other, connections. So, but I'm just curious how, because there's a whole world out there of support groups, whether, and it's very specific, of course. So, which is good.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm older, so I'm always like in person, but here we are online. But Laura, do you have anything you'd like to add about friendships?
I will say like having to ask for help or having like neighbors bring meals or people from like church bring meals. I mean, there are people that like really took time to reach out, kind of, I think like what Emily was saying, people that like you didn't know or you didn't expect to like come and spend time with you. And so it was people that I would have probably never like connected with otherwise who chose to like take the time to reach out or like, show kindness or um, you know, like gave opportunities for connection because it can be very isolating. And, with little kids, like everybody's going to preschool, and we decided not to send our daughter to preschool just because of the risk of just reduce the risk of exposure to illness and things like that. So, things were like a little different than I had planned at that like moment in our lives, but other opportunities came and um, I would say overall, like people, even because we were away from like a lot of people we knew, so I didn't have a lot of connections. But they did develop. It was just, it was different than if I had been diagnosed where we had like moved from. I would have had more people, but it didn't feel like you're so busy like treating your cancer, you don't have a lot of extra time. So,
That is true. It's the extra job.
Absolutely. Do you want to be mindful of time? We have some questions that have come in. So is there anything else that you had prepared that you wanted to ask before we get into our Q&A?
Oh, I don't think we're going to get through it all, so we can just jump to the Q&A. But thank you all so much for sharing your stories.
So we got some questions, it looks like in the chat as well as in the little Q&A button, which I think maybe some of our panelists are able to view. I don't know if I'm the only one that can view it, but one of the questions we got was, how do you feel about the cancer experiences portrayed in media? It doesn't always seem to address social issues. Any thoughts on that?
I will say, from a nursing perspective, whichever, I don't know, it's the Avengers movie or something, sweet Natalie Portman was getting
Oh, it was like a Thor
chemotherapy,
movie.
and it was not hooked up to an IV pump, and it just about ruined the movie for me, guys. They were free flowing that chemo to her.
I'm sorry, what was the question? How does it portray it in media?
Yeah, how do you feel that the cancer experience is portrayed in media? It doesn't seem to address social issues.
So I've seen some movies where it's like that's not realistic at all. That's not like you don't get chemo and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna go to the mall. Like that's just not what I've seen and what I've experienced. But there are some movies, and I've watched them and I have like felt completely shattered because it's my exact experience like on the TV. And they're not like happy endings, which makes it worse, but um there are certain movies that portray it really well. Like there's My Sister's Keeper, there's Clouds, The Fault in Our Stars. That one's not really realistic, but it represents my cancer, so I like it a little bit. um, I don't know. I feel like you can never accurately portray how it is because everyone's experience is so different. So it's kind of hard to encapsulate everyone's experience or how everyone handled everything when there just are so many different experiences.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Can I just say there's a rash or the phenomenon of survivors who have shared their experiences through like autobiographies. There's a lot of good reads out there. And yeah, I second what Emily's saying, and they're all unique in their own way, and that's what I love about them. I personally avoid watching movies that have cancer, and when you find out like 15 minutes in, you're like, oh man, then sometimes I just literally turn it off and just move on, and that's just me. So yeah.
Absolutely. Um, we have another question I can punt to you guys. So one of our questions was, how did you navigate comparing yourself to others, whether that was your healthy peers or maybe other AYA patients that you have met or come across? It's that kind of comparison game.
Yeah, so I had a really annoying time with that because right after I finished my treatment, I had to go apply to college. And so, I was not only trying to be like, how am I comparing to my peers, but how am I going to convince the college admission people that, I'm good enough among my peers to be accepted. I think something that, my mom would always say is that during that time, everyone else was off doing their sports or their clubs or whatever, but, my extracurricular is the cancer treatment. And so just to treat it, whatever else you're doing, like, it is pretty much a full-time job just going through it. And even if you're not like actively getting chemotherapy for a day, still the recovery takes so much energy that you really, you know, you can't think of, oh, I'm not doing any extra things because those extra things that you're doing, you're just replacing it with that cancer treatment. So,
So if I could just add, I failed miserably. So I was basically trying to ignore, I mean, I'm talking survivorship, I'm not talking treatment. So during my treatment lasted about a year with chemotherapy, radiotherapy, external, internal. I only had one other surgery like 3 years later. But I tried to jump right back into it, like literally like 2 months. I'm talking to the home nurse that's visiting, packing wounds daily and asking her, is it okay, to go tubing. So she said, okay. And I think it was more of a social thing. Like, she's like, yeah, you really do need to get out of the house. Like, she's trying to be nice. But well, I'm sure, I don't know what was going through her mind, but I went and I reopened some of the wounds. Um, and then I'm looking for a job. I just wanted a job. So I'm 23 years old, applied to grad school, got in to one of my favorite schools for, like, and then I told them I wasn't coming because I was dealing with like chemotherapy and everything. So I have that kind of residual like FOMO. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna get a job now. So my mom is drive because I'm on like Percocet 4 plus 4 a day. I can't drive. I can barely sit, but I'm going to interviews and they're all thinking I'm like this cool guy because I'm on 4 Percocets. Um, and I can't even believe I was being interviewed while I was on that much narcotics. But you build up tolerance. Um, but I literally was in pain, trying to get a job just because I wanted that independence, I guess. I've been going to college and I just want to do my thing. Um, but did I really have to do all that at the time? Maybe for health insurance, yes, but this was at a time when ACA didn't cover 21 to 25. So now it covers up to, I think, age 25. So I would have been, and luckily I had insurance. Other people my age literally were just going bankrupt or not having access to medical care and not making it for real. So hopefully we don't go back to those days. Um, but yeah, I was comparing myself to all my friends. I think it's natural in your 20s to do that when really it's looking back, it's so much bigger, obviously, than all of that. All of these tasks, these how fast I run a 40, what all insignificant compared to how my friends are taking care, my parents are trying to take care of me, the compassion shown to me, all that stuff is literally just, but I think at the time when you're in it, you want to prove yourself just for ego or whatever, for self-esteem, you want to go through those motions. So at least I did. So
I think
Uh,
that struggle between dependence and independence is pretty intrinsic to the young adult cancer experience.
Absolutely. Oh, my motion sensor light went off in the office. Um, when another question we got just in the chat was when you're making a new close friend or starting a relationship, what factors weigh most heavily on your decision about when and how to disclose your cancer history? So that, yeah, ultimate question.
I kind of disclose my cancer history. If you like, if I meet someone and they know me from social media, they know I had cancer at some point. Like it's on my social media. I wasn't really one to kind of like hide it. Like I know some people these days like will make like a separate Instagram account that you can kind of like follow their like like updates and progress on their cancer. I just posted that straight to my regular Instagram and was like, hey, I have cancer, guys. What's up? And then would kind of post my updates through that. So then, and especially because at the time I was like at home, so I was like, I don't want to go back to school and have to answer all these questions and do all that kind of stuff. So I'm just gonna put it there so everyone can just already see. And then if I would meet someone new, so with my cancer, it left me with a physical disability. I can't run, I can't jump, I can't bend my knee a certain way, I can't walk upstairs normally. You would never know that I had cancer if you didn't see me walk upstairs. I have to do one stair at a time. But other than that, you would never know. But like I found myself just being I had just turned 21, so you can imagine where this is going, but I would be out like with friends and I would have to walk upstairs and someone would be behind me and I would just turn around and be like, "Hey, sorry, I had cancer, like just give me a second." And that's kind of how I just dealt with it. Like I was very blunt. I was very like, "Yeah, like whatever." And sometimes people would be like shocked like, "Oh my gosh, like did she just say that?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, if like you want to know anything, just like let me know." Like I'm very open about it. And for me personally, that was the best way I could handle it because I'm not one to not talk about things. So that's kind of personally how I dealt with that. And then making new friends and relationships, that was kind of like, especially like years ago when I was just coming off of treatment, that was always kind of everyone's first like questions that I knew they had for me without even like really talking first. So I don't know. Nowadays, it's not really like that anymore because I'm so far out of it. At least I feel like I am. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with things.
We are so close to time, but maybe we have at least time for one more question. Another question we got in the Q&A box was, did you feel connected to your medical team? Did it feel like they understood your specific needs as a younger patient in a way?
I'll say I definitely felt very connected to the medical team, both, my oncologists that I saw and all of the staff in the hospital, all of the nurses. I think for me, for my treatment, I was having to go be admitted into the hospital every week, and so pretty much every week, and so I was seeing all the doctors and all the nurses there pretty regularly, which is nice. They knew me, I knew all of them, um, and this is the type, through conversations, it was clear, we got all the updates from my oncologist about this is all the research, this is all the stuff that we're doing. And they were very open about, whenever I had any questions about any of the treatment stuff, to do any, uh, answering all those questions. And, in terms of in the hospital with the nurses, we had a lot of time, because I was just lying there in bed, and for the pediatric nurses, I guess having a slightly older patient for them, I think was probably a good change of pace. And so, I had lots of good conversations with them, just, chilling. But yeah, I think I definitely had good relationships there, which was definitely very nice when in the hospital. So.
Um, yeah, James, you just triggered a happy memory. The nurses at Memorial Sloan, I felt very connected to them. I didn't see the doctors that often. I had two teams, one in New York City and then one in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was kind of follow-up for years, many years. Um, and then I would go back up to New York just to make sure everything's in the right place. But the nurses, yeah, especially with ostomy care, the nurses know so much. I don't want to say more than the doctor. I'm not talking surgery. I'm not talking like we're gonna make you a stoma, but the care of an ostomy appliance, they know all the little tricks. You're trying to get something to stick to your skin without having something bad happening, over the rest of your life. Every day, 24/7. So they know all the little tricks of skin sensitivities and so they were always kind and nice. And the doctors were great. I just didn't feel as connected with the teams. I think part of it was because I was so young. I didn't even know. We're talking brochures, okay? This is before the internet. We had paper brochures. So of course we're in a different scape now where you have access to everything. But yeah, I'm just giving props to the nurses here.
Okay, we are at 7:30, so we might need to be wrapping up. But I just want to extend like a huge thank you to everyone that came to engage as an audience member today, but also to our wonderful panelists for being willing to share your personal experience. As I mentioned earlier, this is really what we're aiming to do with at ANOVA is building this kind of AYA-centered programming to bring patient perspectives directly to the patients themselves, because we know that is something that means a lot and is not always accessible. And so I just really appreciate everyone's candor and willingness to participate today. And of course, a huge thank you to Sarah too for being such a wonderful facilitator. Um, Please, if you're watching this, know that we have our last AYA talk of the year is going to be on sexual health and body image. We're going to have two really knowledgeable presenters exploring that on November 6th at 6 p.m. And so that can be registered via the Life with Cancer website. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your evening, and thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.